What's up? Today you're gonna learn how to terrorize your opponents with the Torre Attack, which is basically an improved and more aggressive version of the London system. I'm Grandmaster Igor Smirnov, and let me show you what I mean. Now, in the London system, which you might be familiar with, you develop your bishop right here to f4, and then you put this pyramid of pawns and continue your development. Now, in the Torre Attack, it's pretty much the same, but you put your bishop to the other square, g5. And initially, it seems like a subtle difference, but it makes all the difference down the line because it gives you a very clear attacking plan for the middle game. Now, let me first show you the main system, most played moves by black here, which is pawn to e6, and after that I'll show you what to do in case your opponent deviates and plays some other moves. So initially, you just do all the usual London system stuff. You develop your bishop to d3, develop the knight to d2. As soon as they play pawn to c5, trying to either put pressure to the center or play c4 and kick away this bishop, you play c3, again the usual system for the London system, so that if they ever play c4, your bishop can retreat back to c2 while standing on the very same active diagonal, and then your opponent will continue your development one way or the other. It doesn't really matter because you put up this system. But now, here comes the difference. So first off, you play knight to e5, jumping your knight to this active central square, and it starts putting pressure all around. If your opponent ever captures on e5, that's actually pretty good for you, because now this pawn chases away this knight. It has to go somewhere backward. It can go forward because you control these squares where the knight could possibly go to with your pieces, meaning the knight will have to retreat somewhere back, which is good for you. But in most cases, they're not going to trade. They're going to play bishop b7 just to continue the development and to protect this knight on c6. And then you play f4, and this move is basically the key difference with the London system, because if you had your bishop right here on f4, then you wouldn't be able to play this move. But now you can, and this pawn structure, the stonewall pawn structure, puts such a strong grip on your opponent that he's literally paralyzed in fear and in general and cannot do much. Because now, if he ever trades here on d4, it's not going to make any difference. Now you just recapture and the position remains to be the same. If he ever tries c4, we know that you just slide your bishop back to c2. Nothing changes really. If he takes right here on e5, then once again you can thank him, because now after the trade, not only you chase this knight away, but you also open up this file for your rook, which is cool. So either way, whatever your opponent does, like, he's still struggling. And also, the other question for black here is, what are they going to do next? They don't have any clear plan. Well, you do. You wish to usually bring your queen right here and solidify your attack. Maybe you can even lift your rook in the same fashion and also bring it into the attack. Either way, you have a ton of attacking ideas, and I'm going to share with you typical attacking patterns, while your opponent is struggling with any productive plan. So for example, if they go pawn h6, I'm just sharing with you right now most played moves by black, so that you are prepared. Now here, of course, you could just retreat the bishop back to h4. That would be a perfectly fine move to play. But now you can even become more aggressive and trade off on f6, because you want to eliminate this knight, which is the main defender of the black king. And this allows you to throw the queen out here to h5. Now this square is no longer controlled by the knight, which is handy for you. And now you can see that the situation becomes more and more dangerous for your opponent's king. You already have your queen in the close proximity. You still have the bishop right here. You've got this active knight putting pressure down these squares. You're ready to use the rook lift, adding one more piece into the attack. And once again, for your opponent, it's pretty difficult to come up with any idea of what to do here. And if they trade on d4, now you could just recapture. This is the standard reaction to recapture with this pawn. By the way, why not with this pawn? Because if you take this pawn out here, it sometimes allows your opponent to jump with the knight forward, attack your bishop, maybe also gives them this file for their rook, and they have some counterplay on the queen side. It's certainly not too dangerous, but nevertheless. Instead, if you recapture with this pawn, then your opponent is still fully locked. They can't go forward in any way. The knight cannot jump here. It will be captured, and he can't do anything. So this would be the usual recapture for you. But in this case, you can go full tell mode and just keep going for the kill. You go knight g4. And after whatever your opponent does here, they capture here or here, whatever move, you just go for the checkmate. You sacrifice your knight, expose the king, and then you come up with the queen h7 checkmate. Right on the next move, after any move of black, queen h7 is a checkmate. So you see how simple that is, and it makes sense because you have this clear attacking plan in mind. By the way, also in this position, I gotta show you, if your opponent tries to run away, then there is also a very useful tactical pattern to learn here. So don't give the check with the queen. The king will just run away. Instead, you gotta make the bishop check first. Now your queen controls this square. meaning the king is forced to go here, but now because of this opposition you can retreat the bishop back to g6 with another check. The king has to go here, but what you achieved with this bishop maneuver is that you brought our bishop closer, and now you can play queen h7, and even though he tries to escape, because of your bishop standing right here, you finish the game. Now let me show you a pretty cool game played by the author of the system, the Torre himself. By the way, you might have heard about this guy from his canonical game against the world champ Lasker, where Torre defeated him with a very fancy windmill tactics. Now, if the game was played nowadays, all the streamers would be like, "Oh my god, this is so sick!" But luckily 100 years ago there was no TikTok, so people could just enjoy chess. Anyways, here in this game, black plays some totally different setup, but you see that for white it doesn't matter. You just have the very same setup that you play. Again, similar to the London system, but you have your bishop on g5 instead of f4. Now here white played knight e5. I typically recommend to castle first, just to stay on the ground, play classical chess. You first continue your development and then you start attacking. Anyways, he slightly reordered the moves, which didn't make a difference in this case. He plays knight e5, then f4 to lock the position, solidify this knight. After bishop e7, white castles, black goes c5. Remember, as soon as he goes c5, you also respond almost symmetrically c3, so that there is an escape square for your bishop. And now black castled, and now we reach this very classical middle game position. All right, again, your opponent could play something different, but you always have the setup. Now, what do you do next? You use the queen lift right here to h3, and from there it's going to start attacking your opponent's king. Therefore, white plays queen to f3. Now, in the game here, black played knight takes e5, which is a very natural move. We'll talk about that in a moment, but let me also show you a few more attacking patterns, because your opponent can play obviously something different, not follow the script, but if you know different common attacking patterns, you will easily be able to choose at least one of them. So how about pawn to h6? Now, that's a pretty interesting situation where you're at the crossroad. Now, if you just want to be an average player, you can simply retreat the bishop back to h4, and that's perfectly fine. If you want to level up and play like strong players, let's say you want to get an FM title, right? You can play queen to h3, which is a pretty cool bishop sacrifice, but after that, you chase away this knight if it can't go away because of queen to h7 checkmate. Now, that's pretty strong. But if you want to be absolutely formidable and get an MF title, let's say, then you can even sacrifice the bishop right here. And then after black recaptures, go queen g3 check. And basically you go full Tal mode. Now you sacrifice the knight with another check. You just sacrifice everything. Now you create a whole lot of pressure onto your opponent. And after whatever move of black, let's say he goes queen e8, trying to, somehow neutralize your queen. Queen takes h6 check. King goes rook a3. Another common idea, rook lift, to add one more piece into your attack. And if black tries to block it somehow, you sacrifice the rook anyways and finish the game in style. Back to the game, black played another common move, knight takes e5, which in most cases is actually a mistake for black, because now after pawn takes, you achieve two nice things for you. You kick out the knight from here, who is the main defender of the black king. It controls all these squares around the black king, and also it opens up the f file for your queen and rook potentially. All right, so after this capture, black needs to get the knight out. They played knight to d7, and now, even though these bishops are opposing each other, and most players would just capture, but queen h3, the move that he played in the game, is stronger. It's our typical maneuver, and from here you simply threaten queen takes h7, mate in 1. Now, what can black do against that? We know that if black tries h6, it's very usual for you to just sack your bishop right here in order to completely expose the king and then to checkmate it. This is clearly bad for black. In the game, he played pawn g6 to block the bishop diagonal, which makes sense, but now we have these new weaknesses, and now instead of just trading bishops, he played bishop h6 to bring the bishop closer to the attack and also to attack the black rook. And if the rook moves, this is the favorite part of the Igor Nation. Don't judge a rook by its cover. Rook takes f7, white sacrifices the rook, and then white goes full Tal mode. I know you guys love doing that as well, sacrificing a bunch of pieces, but of course it's important to also checkmate black at the end. And here, sacrifice the bishop. I really love that, just to keep the attack going with a tempo, to have the force and variation, and then you sacrifice the other rook, and it's not a checkmate, it's a check execution. Back to start. I know what you're thinking about here, but we're not going to talk about coffee, all right? So you add one more opening to your gangster toolkit, and you reduce your sugar intake. 2 in 1. Subscribe to RC. All right, here after bishop g5, you're wondering, what if your opponent tries to attack the bishop with h6 or knight to e4? Now let's talk about that. How about pawn to h6? What do you do then? Well, first off, you could easily just retreat the bishop back to h4. Again, the standard solution. If your opponent tries to keep chasing the bishop, no problem. You retreat the bishop back to this diagonal where you typically have it in the London system. And later on, if your opponent castles kingside, guess what? His king is going to be exposed. And besides that, you just play your usual moves. Now, but the move that I like even more is to actually capture this knight on f6 and to double his pawns. They'll usually recapture this way to open up the bishop. Not like that, but anyways. And then you play e3, the standard thing, but after bishop d6, what I recommend you to do here is instead of playing c3, this usual pyramid of pawns, to go more aggressive and to play c4. Now, why do you want to do that? Because notice that due to the lack of pawn right here, the pawn somehow moved to the side, right? The pawn on d5 is undefended. And so you can effectively undermine and destroy his center. You can also bring the knight out, increase the pressure, and basically your opponent will have to trade on c4, which is good, because now you develop your bishop to this active diagonal, plus you destroy his center presence completely. Now your opponent castles, you go knight c3, and here what I love the most about this is that your opponents, they love the move bishop g4 so much. They think that this pin is a brilliant idea, but it's actually counterproductive if you know how to handle it right. So you play pawn h3, kicking the bishop out. Now, if he trades on f3, good for you. You eliminated his active bishop. Now you have this queen standing into this active diagonal. All these light squares are also potentially weaken his position. That's pretty cool. But in most cases, they won't trade because they want to maintain the pin. That's why they had their bishop on g4 to begin with. So they play bishop h5, trying to maintain the pin, but you go queen d3, which is a very tricky idea. At first, it looks like you're just wanting to maybe develop your queen or to get the queen out of this pin. But in reality, it's a very hidden attacking idea. So here, if your opponent, by the way, trades on f3, that's not a problem at all, because now you have this really cool file against his king, and you're going to castle queenside, but thanks to this open file, you're probably going to checkmate him pretty quickly. All right, but if your opponent plays any other move, let's say in this game they played pawn c6, then all of a sudden you go g4, your opponent retreats the bishop back to g6, thinking that he attacks the queen, but you say, no, bro, it's actually the other way around, because he missed this pin of shame, and now you're up a bishop, you're winning. And I know some of you guys will write in comments, Igor, white is just up a bishop, it's not winning. Like, if that's the problem, if you're not sure how to convert games consistently, I've got a free masterclass where I share with you some few simple rules to follow to make sure that your game is consistent. And if the evil bar shows you that you're up there, it shouldn't flop, right? So you gotta learn to do that. All right, anyways, let's continue. And how about your opponent shamelessly trying to disrupt your system by going knight to e4? Well, he attacks your bishop. It's already defended. It's not such a big problem. But anyways, I'd recommend that you save the bishop and go bishop h4. Now, from here, the bishop actually also somehow prevents him from playing e6, which is a bit funny here. So black cannot normally finalize his development. And you just do your usual London system stuff, develop your pieces as always. It's a little overcrowded here in the center, but what did you expect? It's London after all. And if your opponent plays c5 to attack your center, again, if you love the London system, you can just play c3, but I love the move pawn takes c5 even more. I think it's more aggressive, more interesting. Here the problem for black is usually in similar positions, they would wish to play e6 and grab the bishop, grab the pawn with their bishop like this, developing a bishop to an active square. But here that would be a funny blunder because that actually hands the queen in one move, even though some of your opponents will play that. Anyways, others will probably recapture, but then you can play knight c3 and attack their central pawn. They're still facing the same issue. They cannot play e6 because that hands the queen. And otherwise, there is no convenient way to guard this pawn right here. If they go bishop e6, it's a little awkward, and you can actually go forward and start attacking them with the move pawn to e4, attacking the center. And even though you temporarily sacrifice the pawn, but now you force the king to move to this exposed position, you're going to castle queenside with a check. And for now, knight to g5. Post the pressure right here to this pawn, you can get it back, or maybe to get their bishop, either way is good, and also their king is exposed. Therefore, you just have this much better endgame position for you. And if your opponent tries to get greedy and tries to guard this pawn by going f5, then he's just falling way behind in development, and now it's very easy for you to attack. You castle with a check, the king has to move, and now there are many ways for you actually to keep moving forward and attack, because again, your opponent is kind of stuck here. But the strongest is knight a4. You eliminate the defender of the bishop by attacking this one, and after knight takes e6, now you just simply have way too many threats for black to handle. The main one is knight to c7 with a fork to the king and the rook would be captured anyways because it's cornered. Besides that, there is bishop b5 with another double attack, this time to the knight and king. Even rook to d8 check is possible thanks to your knight right here, controlling that square as well. So you have simply way too many threats, and black is unable to cover even a fraction of them. And if you want to have a more comprehensive guide how I went from 1600 to 2260 in just 1 year, check out this video right there where I break it down.